So this story I'm going to tell you was one of my biggest business failures ever. And this failure cost me about 100 million or so dollars. And the reason I say that I'll get into. But before I was even close to who I am now, before I had different businesses and before I was making money and before I was on the internet and before I had the social media following that I do on Twitter and before I was even 20 years old, I was just a kid with a dream. And I grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I grew up very poor. My family lived on about $10,000 a year, about 1,000, maybe even $1,300 a month. And I always knew one day that I wanted to be rich. I always knew that I wanted to run my own business. I always knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And back in the day, because I'm 26 now, back in the day when I was growing up, it was the tech bubble. And there was Zuckerberg and there was Elon Musk and these guys were building companies and Evan Spiegel built Snapchat. And 10 years ago, everybody who wanted to be in business wanted to be in Silicon Valley. They wanted to be a tech entrepreneur. And that's what I thought I was going to do. And I've had numerous ideas over the past few years, and especially over the past decade. And I'd like to say that my ideas get better over time. But to this day, I still think this idea that I'm going to tell you about that cost me 9 or even 10 figures was the best idea I've ever had. So when I was 19 years old, it was 2015, 2016, and I was just getting into my second year of college. And what ended up happening was I remember I was going to go see my dad, and I grew up broke. We lived on $15,000 a year, $10,000 a year. And I used to take the bus. My first car was a bus pass. My first way that I got around was these little tokens from a company called SEPTA, which is Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority. And I grew up just taking public transport everywhere. Subways, metros, if you know what that is, trolleys, buses. And I always used to carry the coins around. But back when I was in high school, we had these little things called trans passes, and they were weekly cards that had unlimited usage, and we got a new one every week if you qualified for the program, which was you had to live a mile or two away from school. And my school was actually, it was in the hood, but it was the best school in Philadelphia. And I always used to lose the trans pass. I always used to lose the card. And my mom at the time, she had these tokens that she would get for free because she used to take public transit everywhere that she went, even though we did have a car. So I remember one day I was going to go see my dad. Me and my dad were going to go grab coffee, and he was coming from somewhere and I was coming from somewhere. And I had the tokens in my pocket and they kept jangling, kept jangling, kept jangling. And I remember saying, these tokens are super annoying. Like, these things are fucking annoying. And I said, well, what if you could just use your phone? And at the time, back in 2015, 2016, this is when NFC tap to pay technology came out. This is now known as Apple Pay. If you guys use Apple Pay, everyone uses Apple Pay now. So I remember saying, I said, well, what if there was an app on the phone that you could preload credit into, and you could just use that because I know that I'm going to take my phone everywhere I go. I don't know if I'm going to keep the card in a certain jacket pocket, or sometimes I'll forget a token, or sometimes I'll run out. Why can't I just preload the money on the card? And I thought this was a really good idea. This was a great idea. And I'm like, wow, I'm really excited about this. And I said, okay, well, what exists? So I started doing market research. And I'm 19 at the time. I'm undecided major in college. I'm throwing parties to make money on the weekends. And I start getting to work on this thing. And I learned how to basically, I didn't know how to code, but I learned UX and UI design when I was 19. I taught myself it. And basically that's what the software that you use to build apps, to build the wireframes, to build the prototypes, to make sure this screen connects to the other screen and do the buttons and all the sizing and all that stuff. And so I started teaching myself this, and I called it Transit Pay. Project Transit Pay was what it was called. And so 6 months later, after I'm working on this, I'm pitching the idea to people. I'm talking to guys who are computer science majors, who are coders. I'm saying, hey, I want to build this thing. Can you help me? And no one had any time to do it, but I knew this was a good idea. I knew it was a phenomenal idea. And so SEPTA, the transit company, ends up creating a card, and it was called the SEPTA key, I think, SEPTA key. And the SEPTA key was this little teal card, and you used to have to go to a kiosk. So load money in or put your debit card into the kiosk and then load your SEPTA key in and then preload it with money. And I thought, well, that's really stupid. You can just use your phone. And I said, why can't you just put your phone and tap on the phone? So I knew that there was an idea there, and I knew that there was money to be made. So I really just sat on the idea, and I sat on the idea, and I was just having fun in college. I was playing guitar at the time, I was playing music, and I remember thinking a year later that this could be a big thing, and I'm going to start working on it again. I sat with the wireframe, I sat with everything. And I looked at all the other apps. There was an app called Transit, and now I started to formulate a business plan. And this business plan that I had was about a year and a half in the making. So what I was going to do was I was going to integrate Google Maps with the UI of my app that I made, Transit Pay. And instead of just doing SEPTA and just one location, I decided, well, why can't it just be global? Why can't people just use this app and make it global? And I can sign every single metropolitan transportation company, every single public transport company to get on this platform. And people can just insert their card information. We'll take 5 basis points of a transaction fee. If you don't know what basis points are, it's 0.5%. And that's how we'll make money. We can also do advertising like Waze did advertising, because I was looking at all the navigation apps and Waze had advertising. I said, okay, well, we'll take a transaction fee. We'll take the user data, we'll aggregate the user data, and then we can build an ad platform on it. Great. That's how we're going to monetize. And so I really started running the hard numbers, and I looked at the revenues of SEPTA and NJ Transit and New York Transportation. I forget what it's called in New York. But I found out that SEPTA was doing $552 million a year in revenue. And these revenues came from the buses, the trains, the trolleys, the things that people were using every day, the subscriptions from reloading their passes and things like that. So back when Reddit was a thing, you could run polls on Reddit. So I remember running Google submission forms on Reddit, and I asked a ton of questions. And so I took a statistics class in college, which was actually very useful for this, because if you've ever studied statistics, you know about something called confidence intervals. And I got it to a 99% confidence interval based on the sample size of data, which is about 1,500 responses. And you can aggregate the sample size data from everywhere that you're trying to target. So if you get a large enough sample size, you can predict based on that information the opinions, and you can have a confidence level when you go in to make decisions on projects or on business ideas. So I knew that the project would have worked. I knew that the project was validated. So I ended up renaming the name of the thing, and I called it Go. And it was a little pin, and it was like an arrow, and it made Go. And I was like, Go is going to be huge. I put a pitch deck together. And I was 21 when I had finalized everything. And I remember when Apple Pay started picking up and people started using Apple Pay, and you could scan your cards. And I remember trying to scan the SEPTA card to add it to my wallet on my Apple Pay on my phone. And so Go was going to be a navigation app. It was going to be a transit wallet, and we were going to monetize via transaction fees and ads. And obviously we were going to sell the data, and I was going to go full on Zuckerberg. And I thought this was $1 billion idea, because if you impact 1 billion lives, you'll probably make $1 billion or $2. And so I thought, when I was younger, I thought I was going to be a tech billionaire by the time I was like 25. This was my magnum opus golden idea, and I still think, like I said today, this is the best idea that I've ever had. And I remember I had started my corporate sales job. I graduated college and I started my corporate sales job, and I started selling. And I remember I had my first month in sales where I made $13,000 in commission, and I gave up on the idea. During that time as well, I had pitched the idea to a mentor of mine's other mentee. And so I knew this guy who was one of the biggest venture capitalists in the Philadelphia area. And he was a G. He used to show up to class in a G-Wagon, and he knew his stuff. He used to go and take failing biochemical and biotechnology startups and go and buy them for 400 to $500,000 and go and flip them, make them profitable, and then sell them for 5 to 10 million to bigger pharma companies. He had a guy that was in Philly who had a company that was building technologies. So I remember being on the phone with this guy. He was his other mentee, and they were doing about $10 million a year in revenue at the time. And that guy told me, this is a bad idea. And if there's any other company, I don't think you should do this. And if there's any other company poised to build this, it's my company. He was really fucking snooty. And so that guy also ended up offering me a job, which I didn't take. And I stayed in the corporate sales role, and here I am. But I gave up on the idea. A year later, I find out in the news that a company, tech company, got $100 million contract to build this for SEPTA. Just for the Philadelphia area, $100 million contract. And Go would have worked if I really had a few things in order before I was able to do it. I didn't know how to build a team. I didn't know how to sell. This is before I ever knew how to sell anything. I didn't know how to do outreach. I didn't know how to connect with decision makers. I didn't have that executive presence that I do now in my business negotiations. I wouldn't have been taken seriously, at least I thought, even though I was just a kid with an idea, a kid with a dream. And I didn't really have what it took to make that successful. I didn't have any money. I was dead broke. I didn't have any money. I didn't have any contacts. I had no skills besides just having a vision at that point in my life when I was 21. And if you're watching this and you're younger than that, you have a chance. You can do it. So the company got a $100 million contract. And after they got that $100 million contract, I never ever thought about it again. But I remember just being so pissed off going to my sales job, driving, or when we moved to work from home, sitting in my house. I'm like, shit, that dream that I had would have worked. That would have worked. And I had a really bitter taste in my mouth for a while. And then I forgot about it. Fast forward to 2022. My boy picks me up from the airport when I was flying back from Prague. I was in Italy or so. I don't know where I was at. I was in Italy or Prague. I was in Europe, Spain, something. I was doing something. And I remember I flew back to LA and I got a notification on my phone. You can now pay for mass transit using your Apple Wallet. And I fucking screamed. I was bitching about this for days. I was so pissed off. That idea that I had that Apple built, I had in 2016. And so there's a lot of lessons here. A lot of lessons. If I had that idea now and I was 26-year-old David with all of the money and all the experience and the network and the connections, I would have probably been a billionaire in 2 years. And I say that very confidently. There's about a 99% chance it would have worked. Because I have the skill stacks. I have the connections. I have the money. I have the network. I have the experience. I know how to hire. I know how to build a team. I know how to get people motivated. I know how to build that vision. And I know how to go raise money as well. And so I didn't have the skill sets that I do now, which is why it didn't work. And I also didn't have the internal confidence in order to go and make it work. Go was one of those ideas that I feel like people only have once in a lifetime. Now, obviously, my other ideas have made me a lot more money than Go did, but Go had potential. Another lesson that you can learn is Go, I was thinking when I was dead broke, I was like, I want to be a billionaire. Now I see how much money $1 billion actually is and how hard it is to actually become a billionaire. And it makes me think again. It makes me think that now I'm jaded towards business and I'm jaded towards making money and I'm jaded towards the world. Because Go represented a time in my life where I had this big vision, this big grand dream. And I was in a position where I had nothing but time and I knew that I could make it work if I had the right people, had the right network, and had the right information. So, the third lesson that you can take from this is how important speed and execution are. Now, I'm sure you've heard a bunch of other people on the internet say speed is very important, but I also sat on that idea for years. And still, I was in a position to at least have the conversations with people in order to make things work. And so, back then, I was a kid with a dream. And you cannot conceptualize how much money that actually is until you start to make money. And I think hopefully one of these days I'll have another giant dream like that, another idea, another vision for something where I can just make it pop and go out and raise money and use my network and my experiences and go and tear Silicon Valley a new ass. But until then, there's a lot to learn from my experience. Life, especially living a successful life, is all about developing the skills that are required in order to become successful. And I had a ton of other ideas. I had this other idea for an electric heater that I realized that I drew blueprints for and taught myself electrical engineering for. And I realized as soon as I was about to start pitching it to people, and this was even earlier than Go, when I was about to start pitching it to people, it was already built. That's besides the point. The point is that when you have a vision and you have a dream, you got to go out there and build the skill sets necessary in order to go and achieve that vision and dream. And if you don't know how to do it, the only thing that you can ever do, the only thing, is go and build the skill sets necessary in order to achieve that. Because if it's not that, you're going to be successful because you have all of this experience now. Which is why, like I said, 26-year-old me could go out and build that company, no problem. I could have a $50 million valuation in a year, easy. And so the way that I think about it is you have to capitalize on every idea and you have to at least try. I gave up because back then when I was 21, I was beaten down by the world. I was dead fucking broke until I started getting a sales job. And I had no prospects for job opportunities. I had no clue what I was going to do in my life, which is why I took my eye off the ball. And that mistake cost me $100 million because I didn't have the confidence to go after what I wanted and do everything that I possibly could to make it work, to go develop the sales skills, to go develop the executive presence, to go and learn everything I could about the industry of how to make money and how to get people to give you money, which is what raising capital is. I didn't know how anything worked. And I gave up because I didn't have it in me at that point in my life to make it successful. And so a lot of you who watch my stuff, you might not be at the point where I'm at. And you might be experiencing life in a place where I was at the time where you're beaten down by the world, you're dead broke, you have to borrow money for gas, you can barely feed yourself. But you're just a kid with a dream, or you're just a person with a dream of being successful, of living a life that you are truly going to fall in love with. And the biggest lesson is to never give up. Because I was there just a few short years ago, half a decade ago. I was there and I was dead broke and I had nothing to my name and I was barely getting by until I got a sales job, and then I gave up on this big grand dream that I could have sacrificed even more for in the short term to make more in the long term and to get more in the long term. But I gave up. And so my lesson to you is to never give up. And that is the story of how I cost myself $100 million at 21. That's the story of Go. And the story goes a lot deeper than that, but I would need a few more hours to tell it. And I don't want to make this video too long. But don't give up. Move fast, execute with speed, and make sure that everything you're doing, even though it might be a failure and a massive failure, like I had, losing out on an unrealized 9 figures, you need to build the skill sets. Regardless if you win, regardless if you lose, you have to do the best job you possibly can of building that experience and getting that experience so that you can be successful in the long run. I will see you guys in the next video.